I knew the moment my phone lit up at 5 in the morning that someone was about to ruin my day. But I never imagined it would be the same woman whose traffic case I'd be presiding over in 2 weeks. My name is Oscar Preston, and I've lived in the Maple Ridge HOA community in suburban Denver, Colorado, for 3 years now. I'm a municipal court judge, which means I spend my days dealing with traffic violations, noise complaints, and the occasional drunk and disorderly. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me enough flexibility to pursue my side business. Snow removal. Yeah, I know it sounds weird that a judge would run a plow truck, but I grew up in Minnesota helping my dad clear driveways every winter. There's something therapeutic about it, watching the clean path form behind you, knowing you're helping people get to work safely. The snow had started falling around midnight, and by dawn we had about 8 inches blanketing everything. It was a Tuesday in early January, and I'd taken the day off from court specifically because the weather service had been warning about this storm for days. I'd lined up about 20 clients throughout Maple Ridge and the surrounding neighborhoods, all people who'd hired me at the beginning of the season for reliable snow removal. I had a system, a route that made sense, starting with the folks who had to leave earliest for work and ending with the retirees who could afford to wait a bit. I was sitting in my truck, engine warming up, coffee in hand when my phone rang. Unknown number, but with a 303 area code, so local. Preston Snow Removal, I answered, keeping it professional. Yes, this is Tamara Wilson, HOA president of Maple Ridge Community. I need you to plow my driveway immediately. I recognized the name instantly. Tamara Wilson was infamous in our neighborhood. She'd taken over as HOA president 8 months ago and had made it her personal mission to make everyone's life miserable. She'd sent violation notices for everything from trash cans being visible from the street to mailbox designs that didn't meet her newly implemented standards. My own mailbox had been grandfathered in, thankfully, but she tried to fine me $200 because my lawn was a 1/4 inch too long during a week when I'd been in court trials every day. "Good morning, Miss Wilson," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I have a schedule set up for today. I should be able to get to you around noon if that works." "Noon?" Her voice went up an octave. "Absolutely not. I have an important appointment at 9 and I need my driveway cleared now. I'm the HOA president and I'm requiring you as a resident to prioritize board members." I took a slow sip of coffee, counting to 5 in my head. "Miss Wilson, my snow removal business operates independently of the HOA. I have clients who have already scheduled and paid for priority service because they have work commitments. I'll get to you as soon as I can, but I can't bump paying customers." "Excuse me, I am a paying customer. I signed up for your service in November." I pulled up my client list on my phone, scrolling through. "I don't have you on my roster. Are you sure you contacted me?" "I don't need to be on a roster," she snapped. "You live in this community, and as HOA president, I'm invoking Section 14 of our bylaws, which states that residents who operate businesses must provide services to board members on a priority basis." I'd read the HOA bylaws cover to cover when I bought my house, and I knew for a fact there was no such section. "Miss Wilson, that section doesn't exist, and even if it did, it wouldn't supersede my business contracts with other clients. I'll be there around noon." "This is unacceptable. I'm writing you up for an HOA violation." "For what exactly?" "Failure to maintain community standards and refusal to cooperate with the board." I rubbed my forehead, feeling the headache already forming. "You do what you need to do. I'll be there around noon. Have a good morning." I hung up before she could continue. The thing about being a judge is that you develop a pretty thick skin when it comes to people trying to intimidate you. Tamara Wilson was used to bullying people into submission, but I dealt with actual criminals who were far scarier than an HOA president with a power complex. I started my route, hitting up the Johnsons on Elm Street first. Mark Johnson was an ER nurse who had to be at the hospital by 7, and his wife Sarah taught elementary school. They were always grateful, always had their payment ready, and never complained. That's the kind of customer I appreciated. By 8:30, I'd cleared 6 driveways and was making good time. The snow had stopped falling and the sun was trying to break through the clouds. My phone had rung 4 more times, all from Tamara's number, and I'd let every call go to voicemail. I'd check them later, though I suspected they were all variations of the same demand. I was finishing up the Hendersons' driveway when a black Audi came sliding down the street, way too fast for the conditions. I watched as the car fishtailed, the driver clearly not knowing how to handle the icy road. The vehicle clipped a mailbox, overcorrected, and then slid sideways before finally coming to a stop in the middle of the street. The driver's door flew open and out stepped Tamara Wilson. She was in her mid-40s, blonde hair styled in that aggressive bob that seemed to be a requirement for HOA presidents, wearing completely inappropriate heels for the weather. She marched toward me, her face already red with anger. "You," she shouted, pointing a finger at me. "This is your fault." I shut off the plow and climbed out of the truck. "How exactly is you driving recklessly in a snowstorm my fault? If you had plowed my driveway when I asked, I wouldn't have been late, and I wouldn't have been rushing." "You hit a mailbox," I pointed out, gesturing to the destroyed mailbox behind her. "That's the Fentons' mailbox. They're retired, and that's probably going to be expensive to replace. I don't care about their stupid mailbox. I need you to come plow my driveway right now, and then you're going to pay for any damage to my car." I couldn't help the laugh that escaped. "Miss Wilson, I'm not paying for anything. You were driving too fast for conditions. You damaged property, and honestly, you probably shouldn't be driving anywhere right now. You seem pretty worked up." Her face went from red to purple. "How dare you? I'll have you removed from this community. I'll sue you. I'll make sure everyone knows what a terrible, unreliable service you run. Are you okay?" Mrs. Henderson had come out of her house, wrapped in a thick robe. "We heard the crash." "I'm fine," Tamara snapped. "Just dealing with incompetent service providers." "Oscar does excellent work, Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "He's always on time, always professional. We've recommended him to half the neighborhood." Tamara turned her glare on Mrs. Henderson. "I'll remember that when your next HOA review comes up." "Are you threatening me?" Mrs. Henderson's voice went cold. "Over defending someone from your tantrum," I stepped between them. "Okay, let's all take a breath. Miss Wilson, you need to move your car. You're blocking the street. And you need to exchange insurance information with the Fentons about their mailbox." "I'm not doing anything of the sort." That mailbox was probably in violation anyway, sticking out too far from the property line. "It's been there for 15 years, I said. "And it's well within compliance." A Denver police cruiser turned onto the street, lights flashing. Someone must have called about the accident. The officer, a woman in her 30s with a no-nonsense expression, parked and got out. "Morning, folks. Got a call about a vehicle collision." "Everyone okay?" "Officer, thank goodness." Tamara immediately switched to a saccharine voice. "I was driving carefully through this neighborhood when this man's negligence caused me to have an accident. He refused to provide contracted snow removal services, which forced me to drive in dangerous conditions." The officer looked at me, then back at Tamara. "Madam, are you saying he caused you to crash?" "Indirectly, yes. His refusal to plow my driveway when I specifically demanded it as HOA president meant I had to leave late. And so you were driving too fast for conditions because you were running late. Tamara's mouth snapped shut. The officer walked over to examine the mailbox, then the scrape marks on the road. "Madam, I'm going to need your license and registration, and I need to check if you're okay to drive." "I'm perfectly fine to drive. Have you been drinking this morning?" "What? No." "How dare you suggest such a thing?" "I'm not suggesting anything, madam, but you seem agitated. You were driving recklessly according to witnesses, and you hit a stationary object in broad daylight. Standard procedure." I watched as Tamara reluctantly provided her information, her entire demeanor shifting from aggressive to defensive. The officer ran her license, made some notes, and then walked over to me. "You're the Plow driver?" she asked. "Yes, madam, Oscar Preston. I run a snow removal service in Miss Wilson called me this morning demanding I plow her driveway immediately. I explained I had a schedule with other clients and I'd get to her around noon. She didn't like that answer. "And you witnessed the collision?" "I did." "She came down the street too fast, lost control, hit the mailbox, and spun out." The officer nodded, making notes. "And the property owner of the mailbox, that's Gerald and Linda Fenton, 2 houses down, they're probably home." "All right, thanks." She walked back to Tamara and handed her a ticket. "Madam, I'm citing you for failure to control your vehicle and driving at a speed unsafe for conditions. You're also required to contact the property owner about the damaged mailbox and file an insurance claim. Do you have someone who can come pick you up? I don't think you should be driving right now." "This is absurd. I'm the HOA president. This is clearly not my fault." "Madam, your HOA position has no bearing on traffic law. You were driving unsafely and you caused property damage. The ticket is mandatory. You can contest it in municipal court if you disagree with the citation." Tamara snatched the ticket from the officer's hand, her eyes scanning it furiously. I caught a glimpse of the court date. January 22nd, 9 in the morning. That was my courtroom, my docket. "Fine," Tamara hissed. "I'll absolutely be contesting this. This is a miscarriage of justice." The officer maintained her professional demeanor. "That's your right, madam. The court information is on the ticket. Now, can someone come get you?" Tamara pulled out her phone and made a call, turning away from us and speaking in a low, angry voice. A few minutes later, she turned back. "My husband is coming. He'll be here in 10 minutes. Good. Please move your vehicle to the side of the road so you're not blocking traffic." Tamara got back in her Audi and managed to maneuver it to the curb, though not without some dramatic acceleration and brake slamming. Mrs. Henderson had gone inside, and the officer was knocking on the Fenton's door to inform them about the damage. I finished up the Hendersons' driveway and moved on to my next appointment. In my rearview mirror, I could see Tamara standing beside her car, arms crossed, looking absolutely furious. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You haven't seen the last of this. I will make your life in this community hell. Tamara Wilson, HOA president." I deleted it and kept driving. The rest of my morning went smoothly. I hit all my scheduled clients and everyone was happy with the service. Around 11:45, I finally headed toward Tamara's street. Her driveway was on Oakmont Drive, a cul-de-sac with larger homes and, unfortunately, the house where she held most of the HOA board meetings. Her husband had apparently gotten her car moved because it wasn't on the street anymore. Her driveway was still buried under 8 inches of snow, and I felt a petty satisfaction in making her wait. I knew it was immature, but after the morning I'd had, I was feeling it. I lined up my truck and started pushing snow, creating neat banks on either side. The job took about 20 minutes, and just as I was finishing, Tamara came storming out of her house. "It's about time," she shouted over the noise of my truck. "You were supposed to be here hours ago." I shut off the engine and rolled down my window. "I told you noon. It's 11:55. I'm early. Don't get smart with me. I'm writing you up for multiple violations: failure to comply with board directives, operating a commercial vehicle in a residential zone without proper permits, and creating a disturbance." "I have all the proper permits and business licenses," I said calmly. "They're registered with the county and the city. As for creating a disturbance, I'm providing a contracted service during daylight hours, which is well within community guidelines. And failure to comply with board directives isn't a thing, because the board has no authority over my private business operations. We'll see about that. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting, and we're going to discuss your status in this community. You do that, my driveway is clear." "That'll be $80. $80. I'm not paying you a cent. You failed to provide adequate service." "I provided exactly the service I offer. Snow removal completed in a timely and professional manner. If you don't pay, I'll be filing a small claims case." "Good luck with that," she sneered. "I know all the judges in this district." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. She had no idea who I was beyond the guy with the plow truck. I'd kept my professional life relatively private in the neighborhood, mostly because I didn't want people treating me differently. I was just Oscar, the guy in the blue house with the snowplow, the quiet neighbor who kept to himself. "I'll send you an invoice," I said. "Have a good day, Miss Wilson." I drove off before she could continue her rant. I had 3 more clients to hit before I could call it a day, and I was already exhausted from dealing with her drama. That evening I got home around 4 in the afternoon, parked the truck in my garage, and finally allowed myself to relax. My phone had 17 missed calls, all from Tamara's number, and my email had a formal HOA violation notice citing me for 8 different supposed infractions. I read through them with a mixture of amusement and irritation. According to Tamara, I was in violation for operating a business without HOA approval, creating noise pollution, damaging community property with my plow, parking a commercial vehicle in a residential driveway, failing to maintain proper snow removal standards on my own property, displaying unapproved signage on my vehicle, creating a public nuisance, and interfering with HOA board operations. Every single violation was fabricated or twisted. I had HOA approval from the previous board for my business. I wasn't creating noise pollution. I'd never damaged any property. My truck was legally parked in my private garage. My property was immaculate. My vehicle signage had been approved. I wasn't a public nuisance, and I definitely hadn't interfered with anything. Each violation came with a $200 fine, totaling $1,600. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, Marcus Reinhardt, who also lived in Maple Ridge and had his own battles with Tamara over tree placement. He called me back within 30 minutes. "Oscar, this is insane," Marcus said. "She can't just make up violations. I've got the HOA bylaws right here, and none of these hold water." I figured, what do I do? "You have the right to contest these at the next HOA meeting, which according to the bylaws has to be within 30 days of the violation notice. But honestly, I'd recommend we go on the offensive. File a harassment complaint with the management company, document everything, and start building a case. If she's doing this to you, she's probably doing it to others. She tried to make Mrs. Henderson back down earlier today by threatening her HOA review. That's retaliation and intimidation. We can use that. Send me everything, all communications, all documents. I'll draft a response." I spent the next hour forwarding everything to Marcus, including screenshots of the text message and the timeline of events from that morning. I also wrote out a detailed account of the accident, Tamara's behavior, and the police officer's response. That night, I got a call from Gerald Fenton about his mailbox. "Oscar, I heard what happened this morning," Gerald said. "Tamara called me and tried to claim you were responsible for the damage because you didn't plow her driveway. I told her that was nonsense and I'd be filing a claim with her insurance. She hung up on me. I'm sorry you got dragged into this, Gerald. Don't be. Linda and I have been dealing with Tamara's tyranny for months. She fined us because our rose bushes were too ostentatious. Can you believe that? Too ostentatious. They've been there for 20 years. She's fined half the neighborhood for ridiculous things. Well, Linda and I are done. We're gathering signatures for a petition to have her removed as HOA president. We need 60% of homeowners to sign, and we're already at 40%. Would you be willing to sign? Absolutely. Email it to me. Will do. And Oscar, thank you for standing up to her today. A lot of people are too scared of the fines and the hassle. After we hung up, I realized Tamara had made a critical error. She'd pushed too hard, too fast, and now people were organizing against her. The funny thing about HOAs is that they rely on apathy to maintain control. When people actually start paying attention and organizing, the power dynamic shifts fast. The next 2 weeks were relatively quiet. I went back to my regular routine at the courthouse, presiding over the usual parade of traffic violations and minor infractions. I'd reviewed the docket for January 22nd and had seen Tamara Wilson's name listed for a failure to control vehicle charge. I disclosed this to my clerk, Jennifer, and we discussed whether I should recuse myself. "Do you have any personal relationship with the defendant outside of being neighbors?" Jennifer asked. "Not really. She's the HOA president and has been causing problems, but I don't have any financial or personal stake in the outcome." "And the violation occurred in a professional capacity as a police officer witnessed it?" "Correct. I witnessed it too, but I'm not testifying. I'm just aware of the circumstances." "Then I don't think you need to recuse yourself. You're not biased for or against her based on personal relationships. You just happen to live in the same neighborhood. But if she asks for a different judge, we can arrange that." "Fair enough." The HOA meeting happened on January 15th, and it was explosive. Marcus came with me as legal representation, and the community center was packed with at least 60 people, way more than usually attended these meetings. Tamara sat at the front table with the other board members. Richard Kelsey, the vice president who seemed perpetually exhausted by Tamara's antics, and Susan Martinez, the treasurer who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "We're here to address multiple violations by resident Oscar Preston," Tamara began, her voice dripping with false professionalism. "Mr. Preston has been operating an unlicensed business, creating disturbances, and refusing to cooperate with board directives." Marcus stood up. "I'm Marcus Reinhardt, representing Mr. Preston. I'd like to enter into the record that every violation cited in the notice sent to my client is either fabricated or a gross misrepresentation of the facts. Mr. Preston has all required business licenses, both at the city and county level. His business was approved by the previous HOA board in writing, which I have copies of right here. He has never damaged any community property, and his so-called failure to comply with board directives stems from Miss Wilson demanding he prioritize her personal snow removal over his contracted clients, which she has no authority to require." "That's not true," Tamara snapped. "He refused to provide basic services to a board member." He refused to break his existing contracts to accommodate your last-minute demand, Marcus corrected. And then you drove recklessly, damaged a neighbor's property, received a traffic citation, and have been harassing my client ever since. The room erupted in murmurs. Gerald Fenton stood up. I'm the neighbor whose mailbox she destroyed. Tamara tried to blame Oscar and refused to take responsibility. I had to file an insurance claim, and she's been uncooperative the entire time. I also have 17 other residents here who have signed affidavits stating that Miss Wilson has issued fraudulent violations, engaged in harassment, and abused her position as HOA president, Marcus continued, pulling out a thick folder. This includes violations for lawn length during droughts when watering was restricted, fines for holiday decorations that were within guidelines, and threats of legal action for residents who questioned her authority. Tamara's face was bright red. This is a conspiracy. You're all ganging up on me because I'm trying to maintain community standards. You're harassing people, Mrs. Henderson called out from the back. You threatened me because I defended Oscar. Richard Kelsey cleared his throat. Tamara, I think we need to discuss this privately. This meeting is getting out of hand. No, Susan Martinez said firmly, surprising everyone. We need to discuss this publicly. I've been keeping quiet because I didn't want the conflict, but I can't anymore. Tamara, you've been issuing fines without board approval, making decisions without votes, and using HOA funds for personal expenses. I have bank statements that show $3,000 in administrative costs that were actually charges at restaurants and spa treatments. The room went completely silent. That's slander, Tamara shouted. I'll sue you. It's not slander if it's true, Susan replied, her voice steady. And I have the receipts. I've already contacted the management company and filed a formal complaint. I'm also resigning as treasurer, effective immediately because I can't be part of this anymore. Richard stood up. I'm also resigning as vice president. This has gone too far. Tamara, I think you need to step down. I'm not stepping down. You can't make me. Actually, we can, Marcus said. According to the HOA bylaws, Section 28, a board member can be removed by a vote of 60% of homeowners. We have 72% present right here, right now. I move for an immediate vote to remove Tamara Wilson as HOA president and as a board member. You can't do this. Tamara was on her feet, shaking with rage. This is my community. I've worked so hard to make it better. You've worked hard to make everyone miserable, Gerald said quietly. I'm sorry, Tamara, but you've brought this on yourself. The vote was called and it wasn't even close. Out of the 63 homeowners present, 60 voted to remove Tamara from the board. Only Tamara herself and 2 of her friends voted against it. Tamara grabbed her bag and stormed out of the community center, screaming about lawsuits and injustice. The door slammed behind her and the room let out a collective breath. Well, Richard said, I guess we need to elect a new board. Anyone interested? The meeting continued for another hour, and by the end we had a new board. Gerald Fenton as president, Mrs. Henderson as vice president, and a retired accountant named Paul Chen as treasurer. One of their first acts was to void all of Tamara's fraudulent violations and refund fines to residents who'd already paid. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in months. Maple Ridge was finally going to be a normal, peaceful neighborhood again. January 22nd arrived with clear skies and cold temperatures. I put on my black robes, reviewed my docket, and headed into the courthouse. Tamara's case was scheduled for 9 in the morning, and she was the 3rd case on my list. The first 2 cases were straightforward. A speeding ticket where the defendant pleaded guilty and paid the fine, and a parking violation that I dismissed, because of confusing signage. Then Jennifer called Tamara's case. Case number 2025-TR08472, People versus Tamara Wilson, charged with failure to control vehicle and driving at a speed unsafe for conditions. Tamara walked up to the defendant's table with a lawyer I recognized, Brett Harrison from a firm in Boulder. He was competent but had a reputation for being overly aggressive. Tamara looked confident, almost smug. Brett started to speak, then froze as he looked up at me. Tamara followed his gaze, and I watched the color drain from her face. "Your Honor," Brett said slowly, "I'm going to request a brief recess to consult with my client." "Denied," I said calmly. "Do you wish to enter a plea?" Tamara was whispering furiously to Brett, who was trying to calm her down. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a different judge." "There's a conflict of interest." "On what grounds?" "You're the defendant's neighbor and you were present at the incident." "I'm aware. However, I have no personal relationship with the defendant beyond residing in the same HOA community. I'm not testifying in this case." The officer who issued the citation is the primary witness. Unless the defendant can demonstrate actual bias or prejudice, there are no grounds for recusal. Municipal court judges routinely preside over cases involving residents from their communities. Do you have any evidence of actual bias? Brett looked at Tamara, who shook her head reluctantly. "No, Your Honor." "Then we'll proceed. How does your client plead?" "Not guilty," Brett said, though he sounded defeated. The prosecutor, David Chen, was a young attorney who'd been with the city for about 2 years. He was thorough and fair, which I appreciated. "Your Honor, the people are ready to proceed." I nodded. "Officer Martinez, please take the stand." Officer Jessica Martinez, the same officer who'd responded to the scene, was sworn in. David walked her through the timeline of events. The call she'd received about an accident, arriving on scene to find Tamara's vehicle in the middle of the street and a damaged mailbox, the witness statements, and her observations of Tamara's behavior. "Officer Martinez, did the defendant admit to driving at a speed unsafe for conditions?" David asked. She stated that she was running late and had been rushing. She also stated that she'd been forced to leave late because her snow removal service hadn't prioritized her request. "Did she express any remorse for the property damage?" "No. She was primarily focused on blaming the snow removal service provider and demanding that someone else be held responsible." "And what were the road conditions at the time?" "The roads were snow-covered and icy. There had been approximately 8 inches of snowfall overnight, and while plows were out, residential streets hadn't all been cleared yet. I'd been on several other calls that morning for similar accidents due to drivers going too fast for conditions." Brett cross-examined, trying to establish that the road conditions were the primary cause and that Tamara had been driving reasonably. Officer Martinez didn't budge. "The speed limit on that street is 25 miles per hour, she testified. "In those conditions, a safe speed would have been 10 to 15 miles per hour. Based on the skid marks and the distance the vehicle traveled before hitting the mailbox, the defendant was traveling at approximately 30 to 35 miles per hour. That's unsafe for the conditions and actually above the posted limit." Brett called Tamara to the stand. I watched as she swore to tell the truth, wondering how this was going to go. "Miss Wilson, please tell the court what happened on the morning of January 7th, Brett said. Tamara launched into a long explanation about how she'd hired me to plow her driveway, how I'd refused to come when she needed me, how this had forced her to leave late, and how the road conditions were dangerous because the city hadn't properly maintained the streets. "And you're certain you were driving at a safe speed?" Brett asked. "Absolutely. I was being very careful. The car just slid out from under me. It wasn't my fault. David stood for cross-examination. Miss Wilson, you stated you hired Mr. Preston to plow your driveway. Do you have a contract with him? Well, no, not formally, but he lives in our community and I'm the HOA president, so you didn't actually hire him. I called him that morning and told him I needed service. And what did he say? He said he'd come around noon, but I needed him immediately. Did he explain why he couldn't come immediately? He said he had other clients, but as HOA president, I should be prioritized. Did you pay him a premium for priority service? Tamara hesitated. No, but that shouldn't matter. Miss Wilson, you testified that you were forced to leave late. What was the appointment you were rushing to? A hair appointment. There were some muffled sounds from the gallery. David continued. A hair appointment. And what time was that appointment? 9 in the morning. And what time did you leave your house? Around 8:45. So you left 15 minutes before your appointment for a hair salon, that is, according to the address on your driver's license, and the salon you mentioned, approximately 12 minutes away in normal conditions. Yes, but with the snow. So you didn't actually leave late. You left at a time that would have gotten you there on time if you'd driven at a safe speed for conditions. Tamara's mouth opened and closed. I suppose, and when you called Mr. Preston at 5 in the morning demanding immediate service, did you mention this appointment? I don't recall. David pulled out a document. Your Honor, I have phone records showing the call was made at 5:07 in the morning and lasted 3 minutes. I also have an affidavit from Mr. Preston stating that Miss Wilson did not mention the nature of her appointment or the time, only that she needed immediate service because she was the HOA president. Objection, hearsay, Brett said half-heartedly. It's an affidavit which is admissible, I said. Overruled. Miss Wilson, David continued, you also stated the car slid out from under you. Can you describe what you mean? The car just started sliding. I couldn't control it. Were you braking? Yes. Hard braking or gentle braking? I don't know, I just hit the brakes. And were you accelerating before you hit the brakes? I was trying to get down the street. So you were accelerating on an icy road, then braked hard, which caused the vehicle to lose traction and slide. Tamara didn't answer. Miss Wilson, one more question. After the accident, did you contact the property owner whose mailbox you destroyed? Eventually, yes. What did you tell them? I told them it wasn't my fault and that they should contact the snow removal service. So you tried to blame someone else for an accident that you caused. Objection. Brett was on his feet. Argumentative, withdrawn, David said, sitting down. No further questions. The case wrapped up quickly after that. Brett gave a closing argument about how the road conditions were dangerous, and how Tamara was a responsible driver who'd been put in an impossible situation. David's closing was simple. Tamara had been driving too fast for conditions, had caused property damage, and had refused to take responsibility. I reviewed my notes, though I didn't really need to. The evidence was clear. Miss Wilson, I said, I've heard the testimony and reviewed the evidence. The facts are straightforward. You were driving at a speed unsafe for the conditions. You lost control of your vehicle, and you caused property damage. The investigating officer's testimony was credible and supported by physical evidence. Your claim that you were forced to drive recklessly because of a snow removal service provider's schedule is without merit. You had adequate time to reach your appointment if you'd driven safely, and you had no contract or agreement that entitled you to priority service. Tamara started to speak, but Brett put a hand on her arm. I'm finding you guilty of both charges: failure to control your vehicle and driving at a speed unsafe for conditions. You're fined $250 for each violation, total of $500, plus court costs. You'll also be required to attend a defensive driving course within 60 days. Your license will be suspended if you fail to complete the course. Do you understand? This is ridiculous, Tamara burst out. You're biased. You're only doing this because of what happened at the HOA meeting. Miss Wilson, I said sharply, I'm ruling based on the evidence presented in this courtroom. My decision would be the same regardless of where you lived or what position you held. If you believe I'm biased, you have the right to appeal, but I suggest you consider the evidence objectively before doing so. You were driving recklessly, you caused property damage, and a police officer cited you for violations. That's what this case is about. Brett was whispering urgently to Tamara, trying to get her to calm down. Your Honor, we'll review our options for appeal. Thank you for your time. Bailiff, next case. Tamara was escorted out of the courtroom, still muttering about injustice and conspiracies. I saw her in the hallway later through my office window, gesticulating wildly while talking on her phone. Jennifer came into my chambers during the lunch break. Well, that was dramatic. She made it dramatic, I said. The case itself was straightforward. You think she'll appeal, probably, but she won't win. The evidence is solid and there's no actual bias. I followed the law. She's apparently telling people in the hallway that you're corrupt and that she's going to report you to the Judicial Oversight Board. I sighed. Of course she is. Over the next week, Tamara made good on her threats. She filed a complaint with the Colorado Office of Judicial Discipline, alleging that I'd presided over her case despite a conflict of interest, and that I'd ruled against her based on personal animosity from the HOA situation. She also filed an appeal of the conviction. The complaint went nowhere. The Judicial Oversight Board reviewed the case file, the transcript, and my disclosure of the potential conflict, and determined there was no merit to her allegations. The appeal also failed. The appellate court found that the evidence supported the conviction, and that there was no procedural error or bias. But Tamara wasn't done. She filed a civil lawsuit against me personally, claiming I'd conspired with the HOA board to harass her and force her removal. She also sued the HOA, Marcus, Gerald, Mrs. Henderson, and even Officer Martinez. The lawsuit was a mess of contradictory claims and bizarre legal theories. Marcus was actually delighted. She's finally given us everything we need for a malicious prosecution countersuit, he told me over coffee at a local shop. This lawsuit is frivolous and she knows it. She's just trying to intimidate everyone. Can we get it dismissed quickly? Oh, absolutely. I'm filing a motion to dismiss with prejudice. And I'm also filing a countersuit for harassment, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We've got documentation of everything she's done, from the fraudulent HOA violations to the threatening messages to this ridiculous lawsuit. The motion to dismiss was granted within 6 weeks. The judge who reviewed Tamara's lawsuit called it a transparent attempt to use the legal system as a weapon against individuals who had the temerity to hold the plaintiff accountable for her own actions. He also ordered Tamara to pay attorney's fees for all defendants. Our countersuit moved forward. Marcus was thorough, presenting evidence of every violation Tamara had issued, every threatening message, every instance of abuse of power. We had testimony from 17 different residents about her behavior, including documented cases of elderly residents being fined for minor infractions they couldn't physically correct, families being threatened over children's toys visible in yards, and people being denied architectural approval for repairs that were clearly within guidelines. The HOA's forensic accountant also testified about the misuse of funds, showing that Tamara had spent nearly $8,000 of HOA money on personal expenses over her 8-month tenure as president. She'd classified spa treatments as stress management related to board duties, dinners with friends as community outreach meetings, and even a weekend trip to Aspen as a conference on HOA management best practices. There had been no conference in Aspen that weekend. Tamara's defense was that she'd been working hard for the community and deserved compensation. Her lawyer, a different one this time since Brett had dropped her as a client, tried to argue that HOA presidents often had discretionary spending authority. Not without board approval and not for personal expenses, the judge ruled. This is clear misappropriation of funds. The civil case ended with Tamara being ordered to repay the $8,000 to the HOA, plus damages to the individual residents she'd harassed. The total came to nearly $30,000. She was also hit with a restraining order preventing her from contacting anyone from Maple Ridge HOA except through a lawyer. But the story didn't end there. The forensic accountant had referred the case to the Denver District Attorney's office, and they decided to pursue criminal charges for theft and fraud. Embezzling HOA funds was a crime, and Tamara had been remarkably brazen about it. I wasn't involved in the criminal case at all, since it was well above municipal court's jurisdiction. But I followed it through the news and through conversations with neighbors. Tamara was charged with multiple counts of theft, fraud, and forgery after investigators discovered she'd also forged Susan Martinez's signature on several checks. The criminal trial happened in September. I attended as a spectator, curious to see how it would play out. Tamara's defense was that she'd been under tremendous stress as HOA president and hadn't realized what she was doing was wrong. The prosecution presented the forged signatures, the falsified expense reports, and testimony from Susan about how she discovered the theft. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts, Tamara was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay full restitution plus fines. She'd also lost her job as a real estate agent after her brokerage terminated her following the conviction. I ran into Richard Kelsey at the grocery store a few weeks after the sentencing. He looked 10 years younger, the stress lines that had marked his face during Tamara's tenure mostly gone. "Oscar, good to see you," he said, shaking my hand. "I heard about the sentencing. 18 months seems harsh, but given everything she did." "She brought it on herself," I said. "The fraud, the forgery, the harassment. It wasn't just poor judgment, it was criminal behavior." "The new board is doing a great job. Gerald and Mrs. Henderson have really turned things around. Did you hear they got a grant to upgrade the community center?" I did. "It's great to see the HOA actually functioning the way it's supposed to." "All thanks to you standing up to her that day with the snow plow. If you hadn't, I think the rest of us would have just kept our heads down and let her keep abusing her power." "I don't know about that. Someone would have eventually pushed back. Maybe, but you were the catalyst, so thank you." I continued my snow removal business that winter and the next. The new HOA board was professional and reasonable, and we never had any issues. I'd occasionally see Tamara's name pop up in legal filings, usually attempts to reduce her sentence or modify her probation, but none of them went anywhere. The community center renovation was completed in June, and they held a big celebration with food trucks and live music. It was the kind of neighborhood event that Tamara would have tried to control and micromanage, but instead it was organic and fun, with families actually enjoying themselves. I was manning the snow cone machine when Gerald came over with a plaque. "Oscar, the board wanted to give you this. It's just a small token of appreciation for everything you did." The plaque read, "To Oscar Preston, for demonstrating courage, integrity, and community spirit. With gratitude, Maple Ridge HOA Board." "You guys didn't have to do this," I said, genuinely touched. "Yes, we did. You stood up when it mattered and you helped us take our community back. That deserves recognition." Mrs. Henderson joined us, carrying her grandson on her hip. "Oscar, I've been telling everyone about what you did. My daughter asked if you'd be willing to plow their driveway next winter. They live over in Highlands Ranch. I'd be happy to. Have her give me a call in November." As I stood there, watching kids run around with snow cones and neighbors chatting on lawn chairs, I realized this was what community was supposed to be. Not rules and regulations enforced by petty tyrants, but people actually caring about each other and working together. My phone buzzed with an email from the court administration. It was my docket for the following week, the usual mix of traffic violations and minor infractions. I scrolled through the names, not recognizing any of them, which was a relief. I'd had enough drama from defendants I knew personally to last a lifetime. That evening I sat on my back deck with a beer, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and orange. My neighbor to the left, a retired engineer named Tom, called over the fence, "Hey Oscar, you watching the game tonight?" "Which game?" "Rockies versus Dodgers. I've got the grill going if you want to come over." "Sure, I'll bring some beer." It was such a normal, simple interaction, the kind of thing that should have always been normal in Maple Ridge but hadn't been during Tamara's reign of terror. I grabbed a six-pack from the fridge and headed over, feeling grateful for boring, peaceful evenings with no HOA drama. The Rockies lost, but it didn't matter. Tom and I talked about everything from baseball to politics to his grandkids to my cases at court, though I kept things vague to maintain confidentiality. It was the kind of evening that makes you remember why you chose to live where you live. A few months later, I got a letter forwarded through Marcus. It was from Tamara, written from the county jail. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten in neat cursive. It started with an apology, though it took her a full page to actually get there after explaining all the stress she'd been under and how difficult it had been to be HOA president and how no one had appreciated her efforts. "I realize now that I made mistakes," she wrote. "I let the power go to my head, and I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. The time in here has given me a lot of opportunity to reflect, and I see now that I became the kind of person I used to hate. I turned into a petty tyrant who cared more about control than community." The letter went on to describe her therapy sessions and her plans for when she got out. She'd lost her house in Maple Ridge to pay the restitution and fines, and her husband had divorced her. She was planning to move to Colorado Springs when she was released, to start over somewhere where nobody knew her. "I don't expect you to care or even read this," the letter concluded. "But I needed to say it anyway. You were right to stand up to me. Everyone was right to remove me, and I'm sorry for everything I put you and the community through. I hope Maple Ridge is doing well without me." I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I didn't know if the apology was genuine or if it was just something she'd written because her therapist told her to. But either way, it marked the end of that chapter. Life in Maple Ridge continued peacefully. The HOA functioned smoothly under Gerald's leadership, dealing with actual community issues like organizing neighborhood watches, maintaining common areas, and planning events. Violations were issued only when necessary and only for legitimate reasons. Fines were reasonable and applied fairly. I continued my dual life as a judge and a snow removal guy, and people seemed to respect both roles. If anything, knowing I was a judge made some residents more comfortable with my business, figuring I'd be trustworthy and reliable. The next winter was busy, and I added 10 more clients to my roster. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tamara's attempt to bully me into prioritizing her had actually led to more business, as people had heard about what happened and wanted to support me. One snowy morning in December, I was plowing a driveway when I got a call from Jennifer at the courthouse. "Oscar, I know it's your day off, but we have a situation. Judge Morrison called in sick, and we have a full docket including a domestic violence case that can't be delayed. Can you come in?" I looked at the half-cleared driveway, then at my watch. I had 3 more clients scheduled, but domestic violence cases were serious and time-sensitive. "Yeah, I'll be there in 45 minutes. Let me just finish this one and make some calls to reschedule." My clients were understanding, and I made it to the courthouse by 10. The day was long and emotionally draining, dealing with cases that actually mattered, cases where people's safety was at stake. By the time I got home that evening, I was exhausted but satisfied that I'd helped ensure justice was served. That's the thing about being a judge. Sometimes it's mundane traffic violations, and sometimes it's life-changing decisions. You never know what the day will bring, but you show up and do your best to be fair, to listen, and to apply the law correctly. As for Tamara, she was released from county jail after serving 14 months with time off for good behavior. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Colorado Springs as planned and was working as a receptionist at a dental office. She'd been barred from serving on any HOA boards as part of her probation terms, which was probably best for everyone involved. Gerald finished his term as HOA president and chose not to run for re-election, saying he'd done what he needed to do and it was time for someone else to lead. A younger couple, both engineers who'd moved to the neighborhood 2 years earlier, took over as president and vice president. They brought fresh energy and new ideas, including a community garden and a social committee that actually organized fun events instead of just meetings to discuss violations. My snow removal business grew to the point where I hired an assistant, a college kid named Jake who needed work during winter break. He was reliable and hardworking, and having the help meant I could take on more clients without burning myself out. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Court during the week, snow removal during the winter, and enough free time to actually enjoy living in Colorado. I took up skiing again, something I hadn't done since college, and spent weekends at various resorts in the Rockies. The plaque from the HOA hung in my home office, a reminder of that strange, dramatic period when a simple snow removal request turned into a multi-month legal saga. I'd occasionally tell the story to friends over beers, and they'd laugh at the absurdity of it all. But underneath, the absurdity was a serious lesson about power and accountability. Tamara had been given a small amount of authority as HOA president, and she'd abused it spectacularly, hurting people and stealing from the community she was supposed to serve. It took people standing up to her, documenting her behavior, and holding her accountable through both the HOA process and the legal system to stop her. I'd played a role in that, but so had Gerald, Mrs. Henderson, Susan, Marcus, and dozens of other residents who'd finally said enough was enough. That's how change happens, not through one person being heroic, but through a community deciding collectively that they deserve better. And we did deserve better. Maple Ridge became a genuinely pleasant place to live. The kind of neighborhood where people looked out for each other, without it being mandated by bylaws or enforced by fines. The kind of place where you could ask a neighbor for help and actually get it, where kids played in yards without their parents worrying about violation notices, where the HOA existed to serve the community rather than control it. On a spring afternoon, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out looking nervous. "Excuse me, are you Oscar Preston?" "I am. Can I help you?" "I'm Angela Reeves. I just bought the house on the corner, the one that was Tamara Wilson's." I tensed slightly, wondering if this was going to be awkward. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Thank you. I wanted to introduce myself and also to apologize." "Apologize for what?" "I know what happened with Tamara. The realtor disclosed everything because of the legal issues attached to the property. I know she caused a lot of problems, and I wanted you to know that I'm nothing like that. I believe in being a good neighbor, following reasonable rules, and not making people's lives difficult." I relaxed and smiled. "That's good to hear, and you don't need to apologize for anything. You didn't do anything wrong. How are you settling in?" "Pretty well. Everyone's been really welcoming. Gerald stopped by with cookies and Mrs. Henderson brought over a casserole. It's been nice." "That's great. If you ever need anything, let me know. And if you need snow removal next winter, I run a service." She laughed. "I heard about that. I think I'd like to hire you, actually, just to prove that some people in that house can be reasonable." We chatted for a few more minutes, and she headed back to her car. As she drove away, I realized that was the final chapter closing. The house that had been the center of so much drama was now home to someone normal, someone who just wanted to be part of the community. That evening, I walked around the neighborhood, something I did occasionally just to clear my head. The streets were quiet, with the occasional sound of kids playing or someone mowing their lawn. The community center had lights on, and I could see people inside setting up for what looked like a book club meeting. I passed the spot where Tamara had crashed into the Fenton's mailbox. The mailbox had been replaced with a new one, sturdier than the old one. The street had no signs of the accident, just smooth asphalt and fresh paint marking the lanes. Everything that had happened felt almost surreal now, like a story someone else had told me rather than something I'd lived through. But it had happened, and it had changed the neighborhood for the better. Sometimes it takes a crisis to wake people up, to make them realize they have power and agency, and the ability to demand better from their leaders. I thought about all the HOA horror stories I'd heard over the years, communities where petty tyrants ruled unchecked, where residents were too intimidated or apathetic to fight back. Maple Ridge could have become one of those stories, but it didn't. We fought back, we organized, we held people accountable, and we created something better. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Drinks tomorrow? Want to discuss that new case I'm working on?" I replied yes, and kept walking. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere in Colorado Springs, Tamara Wilson was probably finishing her shift at the dental office, trying to build a new life far from the community she tried to control. I hoped she'd learned from her mistakes. I hoped she'd found some peace. But mostly, I hoped she'd learned that power without accountability is just tyranny, and that tyranny, no matter how small, will eventually be challenged by people who have had enough. I finished my walk and headed home, looking forward to a quiet evening with no drama, no violations, no legal battles. Just a regular Tuesday night in a regular neighborhood, which after everything that had happened, felt like exactly what I needed. The Maple Ridge HOA story became something of a local legend. Occasionally, Reporters would call asking if I'd be willing to talk about it for some article on HOA reform or community organizing. I usually declined, not because I was ashamed of what happened, but because I didn't want the attention. I'd done what anyone should do when confronted with injustice. I'd stood my ground and let the system work, and it had worked. Not perfectly, not without complications, but it had worked. Tamara was held accountable, the community was restored, and life went on. That's really all you can ask for. Justice doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it's dramatic courtroom moments, and sometimes it's just a community deciding they deserve better and working together to achieve it. Both are equally important. As I unlocked my front door, I noticed a package on the porch. It was from the Colorado Association of Municipal Judges, and inside was a certificate recognizing my service and contributions to the legal community. There was also a note inviting me to speak at their annual conference about ethics and conflicts of interest in small jurisdictions. I laughed, thinking about how I'd explain the Tamara Wilson case to a room full of judges. So there I was, plowing driveways in my neighborhood, when the HOA president demanded I prioritize her snow removal, and then she crashed her car and ended up in my courtroom. Yeah, that would be quite the presentation. I set the certificate aside and made myself dinner, a simple pasta dish with vegetables. The house was quiet, peaceful, exactly how I liked it. Tomorrow I'd go back to court, rule on traffic violations and small claims, and then come home to this same peaceful quiet. It was a good life, made better by the fact that I lived in a community that had learned to value fairness over control, cooperation over domination. Maple Ridge wasn't perfect, no place is, but it was genuinely good now, and I was proud to be part of it. As I settled onto the couch with my dinner, I pulled up the news on my tablet. There was a story about another HOA in Aurora that was facing similar issues with an abusive board member. I made a note to send the article to Gerald, thinking maybe we could offer some advice or support to those residents, because that's what communities should do. Help each other, share experiences, lift each other up, not tear each other down through petty rules and power trips. The Rockies game was on, and I half-watched while eating, my mind wandering through the events of the past year. It had been quite a ride, from that snowy morning when Tamara demanded I plow her driveway first, to watching her sit in my courtroom, to seeing her led away after her criminal conviction, to receiving her apology letter from jail. All of it could have been avoided if she'd just had a little humility, a little respect for others, a little understanding that being HOA president was about service, not power. But she'd made her choices, and she'd paid the consequences. And me. I'd just been a guy with a snow plow who refused to be bullied. Sometimes that's all it takes to start a revolution, even a small one in a suburban HOA community in Denver. I finished my dinner, washed the dishes, and headed to bed. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, maybe even new drama, though hopefully nothing as complicated as what I'd experienced with Tamara. But whatever came, I knew I'd handle it the same way I'd handled everything else, with fairness, integrity, and a refusal to let anyone abuse their power without consequences. That's what being a judge meant to me. That's what being a good neighbor meant. And that's what I hope to continue doing for years to come, whether I was wearing robes in a courtroom or driving a plow truck through snowy streets. Justice, after all, isn't just something that happens in courtrooms. It's something we create every day through our choices, our actions, and our willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. And sometimes, it starts with something as simple as refusing to let an HOA Karen cut the line for snow removal. The end of the story wasn't dramatic or climactic. It was just life returning to normal, which in its own way was the best possible ending. Maple Ridge continued on, hosting summer barbecues and winter holiday parties, electing new board members and maintaining its facilities, being what an HOA should be. A helpful organization that makes living in the community easier, not harder. I'd learned a lot through the whole experience. About power dynamics, about community organizing, about the importance of documentation and legal processes. But mostly, I'd learned that ordinary people have more power than they think, if they're willing to use it. Tamara had counted on everyone being too scared or too apathetic to challenge her. She'd been wrong, and that made all the difference.